What's going on with Brian Rose lately?
What's going on with Brian Rose? Oh, Brian Rose is the grift that keeps on giving. So he's the host of the London Real channel and has been running for London Mayor recently. I don't know. Do you think many of you viewers will be aware of Brian Rose already or not?
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
Sure.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd always sort of been aware of the London Real platform, the London Real show, and kind of had a sort of ambivalent relationship to it. It seemed very corporate and very, it seemed very corporate, very glossy, but at the same time, they did some really interesting interviews. And then last year, after Brian had David Icke on, he then ran this digital freedom platform, free speech thing, which I think now you can safely say was a scam. Like he claimed to have raised $1 million from it for a supposed free speech platform that he said was independent of London Real. Turns out it was completely owned by him. It was a plugin in the London Real website. So I did a few films about that at the time. And then recently he has decided to run for London Mayor and has a similarly tangential relationship with the truth. So, but he is one of the most, I think someone in one of the interviews said he's probably got the least self-awareness of any man they've ever seen. And so he is objectively hilarious. But it's also, for me, the thing that I've become very exercised about during the London Mayor campaign is just how poor the quality of journalism has been covering him. So I did a few films about him last year. I sort of wasn't that interested in returning to the subject, but then the Times did a profile and the Evening Standard did a profile that had none of the context whatsoever. It was just sort of saying, look at this funny man running for London Mayor. It's like they hadn't done a basic cutting search or even Googled him, because there's a Vice article about the YouTuber accused of scamming his followers over coronavirus. There's all of these reviews of his courses. There's Facebook groups of unhappy customers. There's Reddit threads. There's all of this stuff that you can find, and all of the videos that I've put out and CoffeeZilla has put out and a few other people have put out. And so, yeah, the thing that was really pissing me off was just how bad a job the mainstream media was doing in covering Brian Rose. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get back into it. And I did a piece for Unheard and then another couple of interviews on Rebel Wisdom.
Before I asked you that question, I was trying to get an update about how his London Mayor campaign is going. So a recent poll has Brian Rose holding 2% of the vote. Nico Omilana, a 23-year-old YouTube prankster who is running his campaign under the guise NDL, or the Nico Defense League, is currently holding 5% of the vote. So I take it his campaign is not going too well.
No, he's got, as you say, he's got about 2%, which, to be fair, is more than Lawrence Fox is polling at the moment. But that's part of his scam, is that he keeps claiming that he's in second place because he's bet on himself heavily in the bookies. Therefore, he's changed the odds. Therefore, he's putting up films saying, I'm the second place candidate. Why is the BBC not inviting me on? Which is ludicrous, because Sadiq Khan has got 40% of the vote. Then there's Sean Bailey. Then there's the Lib Dem candidate. Then there's like three other candidates before Brian Rose. But he just cannot stop lying. That's the most amazing thing about him. I mean, he's following the kind of Trump playbook, I guess. But the irony is he seems less likable than Trump.
Is this all a kind of marketing ploy for London Real? Like, in terms of, obviously he's got Brian Rose plastered on billboards and on buses, because I think that I saw that he's actually stopped doing interviews. I don't think he's done an interview in about 4 months. Is this just going to bring back all people to his accelerator programs and whatnot?
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, Brian Rose is one of the most narcissistic people the world has ever seen. That's why it's such a fascinating character study. And I partly wonder, I mean, there's a few different reasons for the mayoral bid, one of which is that his YouTube audience turned against him in quite a major way after the Digital Freedom Platform. So he basically rinsed them for $1 million, refused to answer questions, went on, so started banning and deleting comments like constantly on his channel. Like there was a major revolution. He went on this kind of rampage, calling out, arguing with his own audience at one point. That was absolutely hilarious, saying, you didn't, let me guess, you didn't donate. Winners concentrate on winning, losers concentrate on winners, like calling his own audience a bunch of losers because they wondered what happened to their money. So he basically had to pivot to something beyond the London Real channel because YouTube was onto him. But I don't know where he goes from here. I mean, obviously he's probably going to get a few more people signing up to his courses off the back of the publicity that he's got from the London Mayor run, but all of the credibility that he had. So some of his former guests like Dorian Yates have started to call him out, and they've refused to come back on. They pulled out of interviews saying, I wanted to ask Brian about the Digital Freedom Platform, about why so many people think his courses are a scam. He refused to have that conversation, so I'm not comfortable going on the show. Like Dorian Yates is supposed to be one of his guests of honor at this big live event that he's doing at the end of this year or next year. And obviously that's not going to happen. So I don't know. I mean, I look at it from, so someone like CoffeeZilla, who I've done a couple of interviews with, and he's covered Brian and a lot of these other sort of online, these sort of dubious business gurus and online kind of get rich quick schemes, and basically says that he's always surprised at how often people can reinvent themselves when you think that they've kind of got no future. But I really do wonder, I don't know where he goes. And there's something almost compulsive about him wanting to be the center of attention and wanting to have his name up on a billboard, and like that sort of personality constellation is very, like it's a hard, narcissism is a hard taskmaster. And so I don't know if there is a plan. Maybe there is, but I don't quite understand what it is. And I think he's going to have to keep pivoting and pivoting and pivoting, but I don't know where he's necessarily going to go next. Some people have speculated that when he gets 2%, he's going to do what Trump did and claim that the whole thing was rigged, and that there was a scam and he was on the wrong end of it, and that could be something he continues. I don't know.
Before we started this podcast in 2018, I looked at Brian and I saw him as kind of a bit of a renaissance man in the space. I viewed him as this new age alternative media guy, very open-minded, would speak to people from the left, he'd speak to people to the right, Taoist monks to politicians. But then as time got on, it seemed like it was more then for him about accelerator courses, obviously the whole Ike scandal. And this is my big issue with him, this is my gripe with him, in that in the birth of alternative media, that he will cast distrust amongst channels like yours, like mine, that are trying to do good work, good journalism. That's my worry. Is that a problem, that he could stain the push for alternative media?
That was what I was most unhappy about with what happened last year at the beginning of the corona pandemic, that because freedom of speech is such a huge thing, and any of us that are wanting to have real conversations about controversial topics or difficult topics care a lot about that. Like, we don't trust the big tech platforms, we don't trust the mainstream or legacy media to be able to treat these things well. So it's a hugely important thing. And it was entirely cynical and entirely dishonest, his kind of claim of free speech, and then to manipulate a load of people into giving him money for this sort of, and he pitched it as an independent platform to have controversial conversations, and it wasn't. Like, it was a Daily Motion plugin within the London Real website, fully owned by Longstem Limited, that is his company, sole shareholder Brian Rose, that owns London Real. Like, it was not what it said in the tin in any way whatsoever. And also the cynicism of, he knew what David Icke was going to say when David Icke came on London Real. Like, quite a few of his staff objected massively. They said it was irresponsible. They said it was not okay. Because David Icke basically said Corona is a hoax. It's a fascist takeover, and humanity needs to get off its knees and do what it, and otherwise. And he basically said it was caused by 5G at the time when 5G masts were being burned down, when engineers were being threatened. YouTube were inevitably going to have to take that interview down because it was putting people's lives at risk. Like, you've got to have, I mean, there's so many big questions that come up with this. And it's like, what are our responsibilities and what are our moral obligations as media producers? And Brian Rose deliberately tried to create that, tried to position himself as a free speech martyr, and then was abusing that term of freedom of speech that so many people are passionate about to line his own pockets in a completely cynical way. And then the free speech martyr then was just deleting anyone's comments, asking what was going on, banning people from his YouTube channel, refusing to answer questions. Like, it was disgusting. The whole thing was disgusting about a topic that I think so many of us find really sacred. I'd go as far as to say the values that he's exploiting and manipulating are sacred values.